He survived 61 duels. He mastered every weapon in Japan. Then he walked into a cave and picked up a brush. What he wrote there has outlasted every sword he ever carried. What did Miyamoto Musashi discover at the end of his life? He won 61 duels and never lost. In his final years, Japan's greatest swordsman set down his sword and picked up a brush. What did the undefeated warrior discover that was more powerful than any blade? By 1643, Miyamoto Musashi was 60 years old and the most famous swordsman in Japan. His dueling days were long behind him. The Hosokawa clan of Kumamoto had given him an honored position as a guest, part teacher, part living legend. He painted, carved wooden sculptures, wrote poetry, and occasionally taught the small number of students he still accepted. He was comfortable. He was celebrated, and he was not finished. In the spring of 1643, Musashi climbed into Reigando, the cave of the spirits, on the rocky face of Mount Iwato, an hour's walk from Kumamoto Castle. He chose isolation deliberately. He was 60 years old and already ill. He would die 2 years later, 2 weeks after completing the manuscript. He wanted no distractions, no students, no obligations, no comfort. Just the cave, a brush, ink, and the accumulated understanding of a lifetime. He began to write. The work he produced is called Go-Rin no Sho, the Book of 5 Rings. It is divided into 5 chapters named after the classical elements: earth, water, fire, wind, and void. It is less than 100 pages. It has been translated into dozens of languages and placed on the desks of military commanders, business executives, athletes, and martial artists for nearly 4 centuries. The most dangerous weapon Miyamoto Musashi ever forged was built from words. The first chapter, Earth, establishes the foundation. Musashi opens with a declaration that the way of the warrior is inseparable from the way of the craftsman. Both require complete commitment to their work, a willingness to study every dimension of their craft, and a refusal to separate major strategy from minor tactics. True mastery means understanding the large through the small, and the small through the large. The sword and the carpenter's tool, he argues, are the same instrument in different domains. The second chapter, Water, describes the warrior's mind. The ideal mental state for combat, Musashi writes, is neither aggression nor calm. It is adaptability. Water takes the shape of any container. It yields to pressure and flows around it. The warrior's mind should be the same, responsive to whatever situation arises, unattached to fixed strategy, never forcing and never resisting. This chapter reads less like a fighting manual and more like a meditation on the nature of consciousness. Fire is the chapter on combat itself, on the dynamics of real confrontation. Musashi writes with brutal precision about timing, initiative, and psychological pressure. He describes how to break an opponent's rhythm, how to make them react rather than act, how to win before the fight has technically begun. These are not theories. They are observations distilled from 61 duels. Each sentence carries the weight of a man who has actually done what he describes, against opponents who were trying to kill him. The fourth chapter, Wind, is the most unusual. Musashi devotes it entirely to critiquing every major sword school in Japan. Not their techniques, but their philosophies. He identifies the precise error each school makes: an over-reliance on speed, an obsession with a particular stance, a failure to understand that the ultimate goal is not to perfect a technique, but to transcend the need for it. He had trained in and defeated practitioners of all of them. He knew exactly where each one fell short. The fifth chapter, Void, is the shortest. It is also the most difficult to understand and the most important. The void, Musashi writes, is not emptiness. It is the state beyond knowledge and technique, where true mastery lives. The warrior who has practiced long enough no longer consciously applies strategy. They simply respond. The distinction between intent and action disappears. He cannot fully explain this state in words. He can only point toward it. This is what 61 duels had taught him, and it cannot be taught. What Musashi was describing in the Void chapter has a name in Zen Buddhism: Mushin, no mind. The state in which action arises without deliberate thought, in which the practitioner has so thoroughly internalized their training that the self, the calculating, hesitating, fearing self, steps aside. Musashi had not set out to write a philosophy. He had set out to record what he observed across 61 encounters with death. But what he discovered was not technique. It was the dissolution of the self, who needed technique. This is why Musashi kept fighting long after he had nothing left to prove. He was not chasing victory. He was chasing something else. A state of clarity that only total risk could produce. You cannot reach Mushin in practice. You cannot reach it in theory. You can only approach it in the actual presence of death, when thinking becomes a luxury you cannot afford. 61 duels were 61 experiments in the dissolution of self-consciousness. The Book of Five Rings is the laboratory notes. Musashi completed the manuscript in the spring of 1645. He wrote a brief dedication and gave copies to his students and to Lord Hosokawa. 2 weeks later, he was dead, most likely from lung cancer, his body finally claiming what 61 duels had not managed. He died calmly, having written out his last instructions. He was 62 years old. The book was done. He was done. Both things were true at exactly the right moment. For the following century and a half, the book circulated quietly. Sword schools passed copies among themselves. Military strategists studied it. But it was not famous. It was not widely read. Japan in the 17th and 18th centuries was at peace. The era of the great duels and the constant warfare was over. The world Musashi had described of life-or-death combat as a path to self-understanding, had officially ended. The book waited. The transformation came in the 20th century. First, Japanese military commanders rediscovered the book as a manual of operational strategy. Then, in the 1970s and 80s, Western business executives, studying Japan's industrial miracle, found it translated into English. They recognized in Musashi's descriptions of initiative, adaptability, and decisive action something that applied directly to competitive markets. Toyota, Sony, Japan's post-war rise. The question began to circulate: had Musashi's philosophy shaped an entire civilization's approach to competition?
The book is now taught at business schools, military academies, and sports performance institutes on every continent. Athletes use it to prepare for competition. Executives use it to think about positioning. Military planners use it alongside Sun Tzu. Musashi would have found most of these applications surprising, and probably correct. His central argument was that true strategy is transferable across domains. He would not have been surprised that it worked for Toyota. He would have expected nothing less. What makes the Book of Five Rings genuinely unusual among strategy texts is its honesty about what it cannot say. Musashi does not claim that following his principles guarantees victory. He does not offer a system to be memorized and applied. He offers instead an invitation to a level of mastery that cannot be systematized, that must be earned through direct experience, through thousands of hours of practice, through the willingness to be wrong and to begin again. The book's deepest lesson is that the book itself is not the point. Most strategy texts offer frameworks. Do these things get these outcomes? Musashi offers the opposite. The frameworks are temporary scaffolding, useful for building competence, but ultimately to be abandoned once the structure can stand without them. A swordsman who still needs to think about their stance in combat has not yet mastered their stance. The goal is to make knowledge disappear into instinct. Strategy becomes wisdom only when it stops being a strategy. Musashi wrote the Book of Five Rings alone in a cave 2 weeks before his death, at the end of 61 encounters where he could have died but didn't. It is not a triumph, it is a gift. The distilled product of an extraordinary life offered to anyone willing to pay the price of mastery in any domain at any time. The sword rusts. The philosophy does not. Next time on Samurai Chronicles, Japan's most radical military experiment. In 1575, at the Battle of Nagashino, Oda Nobunaga faced the most feared cavalry in Japan, the Takeda war machine that had never been stopped. His answer was 3,000 arquebuses firing in coordinated volleys. Was this the day firearms changed Japan forever? Or is history more complicated than that? If Musashi's philosophy gripped you, the idea that true mastery means making knowledge disappear into instinct, Subscribe to Samurai Chronicles for a new episode every day. Drop a comment. Which of the 5 elements speaks to you most? We'll see you in the next battle.